to stop France from imposing discriminatory digital service taxes. Tariffs also forced China to discuss the systemic challenges between our two nations. Frankly, every enforcement action, whether it's a WTO dispute, a Section 301 investigation, or a preference program review, ultimately relies on the threat of tariffs to secure objectives. Accordingly, it's important to contextualize the tariffs in the design of the larger policy. The real headline then becomes the fundamental shift in trade policy since President Trump's inauguration, where the United States now actually plans to do trade again. My colleagues and I in Congress want to pursue a real trade policy. That was put on hold during the Biden years. We now have a president who will partner with us in that effort, and together we will enforce our rights, we will negotiate again, and we will expand opportunities for Americans. This administration is not deliberating endlessly over whether trade can be a force for good, like the past administration, which refused to even engage in bipartisan or bilateral market access trade negotiations. Trade today is the centerpiece of our international economic engagement, and we have plenty of substantive trade ideas to discuss. Businesses want certainty from good policies that will continue so that they can invest confidently in prospects that create jobs and wealth. That is one of the primary reasons that I'm working hard to make the Trump tax cuts permanent, to provide businesses with the certainty they need to make long-term investments to drive growth and increase prosperity across all segments of the economy. Contrast this kind of certainty and forward thinking on trade with that of the last 4 years, where the only certainty was that you were going to lose ground because your government fundamentally rejected free markets, free enterprise, and free trade. The last administration turned to industrial policy because it was certain that the free market failed in delivering what government planners believed was necessary for climate and social agendas. Indeed, China's central planners saw their own strategic thinking in the Inflation Reduction Act's approach of bestowing massive subsidies to stimulate investments that the market would not. We can restore faith in free markets by making it easier than ever to do business in America. The president's executive order last week to assist major investors to navigate our regulatory system efficiently is a good start. We plan to do more. The Biden administration provided us with only the certainty that in the face of a foreign government's discriminatory policies like digital service taxes, data localization, or other non-tariff barriers, it would not stand up for its citizens because it believed that the so-called right to regulate trumped the principle of free enterprise. Respectfully, democratic governments do not have rights. They exist to secure rights for their citizens. One immediately welcome change under the Trump administration appeared last week in the USTR's National Trade Estimate. Last year, the Biden administration deliberately cut from the estimate a number of discriminatory measures imposed on America by foreign governments because it sided with those governments over our citizens. This year's estimate is exhaustive because the administration carefully identified all of the ways that Americans lose out in the global marketplace. Finally, the validity of free trade will be seen again. The last administration did not pursue market access in its negotiations. Instead, it demanded governments to undertake a number of social and environmental commitments, even ones Congress did not approve of domestically. Not surprisingly, our partners did not put their trust in such negotiations. While tariffs inherently may be seen at odds with free trade, we must also acknowledge that many of our trading partners deploy barriers that have gone unchallenged for too long. Free trade, by definition, must be reciprocal. We do not have it if others can impose barriers on us unchallenged. Our failure to enforce our rights over the last 4 years lost a lot of ground for us. This cannot continue because what I am certain about is that American goods and services are innovative, high quality, and globally competitive. Senior administration officials say that a number of countries are coming to the table to engage with the USTR. We look forward to hearing about this engagement and the steps toward better opportunities for Americans. With that, I turn to Senator Wyden for his remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Independence. Thank you for coming before the committee, and I look forward to hearing your testimony. I'm pleased to recognize the ranking member, Mr. Nill, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you, Ambassador Greer, for being with us today. There's a new political caucus, as you know, that has been formed in this town. It's called Republicans for Tariffs. This is the first time that we've heard them ever embrace tariffs. And I must point out that Liechtenstein doesn't stand a chance. From the economic soft landing that President Trump was handed, and low unemployment rate, 2.9% average growth GDP, and millions of jobs created during the previous 4 years, it's only taken him 79 days to inflict this permanent damage. Recession odds are getting higher by the day. We are following the largest tax and tariff hikes in decades. The average family will confront about $3,800 in new costs. Look at one's 401k, retirement savings, education plans, new home and auto sales been wiped out. The layoffs continue, and the plant closings that the chairman referenced today are continuing as well. Trillions of dollars have been lost just in the last week. The National Review and the Wall Street Journal, hardly left-wing publications, have both warned against the tariffs, and National Review saying today it's time for Congress to assert itself and end this trade war. Last night, the president said he's now coming for higher drug prices. Between the cuts they've planned to our programs at lower cost and the rising prices of these tariffs, their giveaways won't make a dent in the higher costs our colleagues have planned, apparently, for the American people. The Wall Street Journal editorial board said it best. This is the dumbest trade war in history. It's not only dumb, it's unconstitutional. It started with the Trump administration's unprecedented opposition and imposition of emergency tariffs on two of our closest allies. You and I, Mr. Ambassador, know something. We negotiated USMCA. It was a good deal. 195 Republicans voted for it. 196 Democrats voted for it. It was a real negotiation, coupled with the fact that it is to be reviewed next year. Instead, we're now imposing tariffs on two of our longtime friends and neighbors. The president has given himself delegated powers under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEPA. It's not a blank check for this president or any president to utilize without congressional assent. On April 2nd, he stretched it even further to self-delegate more emergency powers. Now he's defying economics and attempting to convince people that the trade deficit that we've had for the last 50 years is suddenly an unusual and extraordinary emergency. I've had the highest regard for USTRs. I've worked with all of them during my time on this committee. I know what they really think. But whether we or you think that this trade deficit is a concern or not, most serious economists say it is. It's clear that it does not meet the definition of an emergency statute. Republicans in Congress are missing in action, afraid to speak up, knowing that they've never embraced tariffs as an economic suggestion. I could never have imagined witnessing this as our Republican colleagues act as though nothing is happening. The Constitution clearly vests trade authority in Congress, and the powers that have been delegated to the president and USTR over the years remain paramount. But the constitutional arrangement has always been based on trust and adherence to the law, and we've had a lot of trust with USTR over the years. That trust is now fractured and on the verge of being permanently broken. I've heard your defense of tariffs, and I expect we'll hear more today. We don't object to all tariffs. Targeting tariffs, the threat of tariffs, it frequently can bring about an outcome that is negotiated and desirable. But to raise prices on the American family and to kill our own exports is unacceptable. Starting a trade war with every other country at the same time is bad strategy, and driving away allies that have stood with us for decades None of us on this side of the dais understand it. The courts will often see these trumped-up emergencies for the pretext that they are, and eventually will declare many of them to be illegal. Trade policy should return to serving America's interest and being consistent with the law and indeed our Constitution. The people cannot afford more amateur hour undertakings. Trade policy needs to move back into the hands of Congress for real negotiation the way it was intended. We can begin by restoring some of that trust that has been so badly damaged in the last week. Mr. Ambassador, we want to work with you on these trade agreements. Closing the doors to America is not sound policy. It can be fixed, but it's going to take putting the rule of law over ego and greed. I yield back my time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Today's sole witness is the United States Trade Representative, Mr. Jamieson Greer. The committee has received your written testimony and it will be made part of the formal hearing record. Ambassador Greer, you have 5 minutes to deliver your remarks and you may begin when you're ready.
Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Neal, and members of the committee, thank you for taking the time today for this hearing. Chairman Smith, I appreciate your opening statement and the details of some of the effects that prior trade policy has had in your district. And Mr. Neal, I appreciate the work we've done in the past and your willingness to continue working with us. Last Wednesday, President Trump declared a national emergency in response to the large and persistent trade deficit that has built up in recent years. This deficit is driven in part by non-reciprocal tariffs, trading barriers, and other economic policies pursued by our foreign trading partners. President Trump imposed tariffs to address this emergency. These measures are aimed squarely at achieving reciprocity and reducing our massive trade deficit. This national emergency declaration and tariff action is the most significant change in U.S. trade policy since we allowed China, unfortunately, to join the World Trade Organization. The American working class in particular has suffered concentrated losses from the so-called China shock and other adverse effects of past trade policy and the conditions that give rise to our massive trade deficit. The United States has lost 5 million manufacturing jobs and 90,000 factories since 1994. President Biden left us with a $1.2 trillion trade deficit in goods, the largest of any country in the history of the world. The United States share of world manufacturing output declined from 28% in 2001 to 17% last year. In the fourth quarter of 2024, U.S. manufacturing as a share of gross domestic product was the lowest it had been in 20 years. During COVID, we were unable to procure semiconductors to build our cars or materials for pharmaceuticals and personal protective equipment. During World War II, we built nearly 9,000 ships. Last year, the United States built only 3 ocean-going vessels. Our agricultural trade balance, which historically resulted in trade surpluses for our farmers, was in deficit the last 2 years of the Biden administration and likely will take some time to recover. These are all serious indicators of an economic and national security emergency. One important driver of these negative trends has been unfair, unbalanced, and non-reciprocal trade. This includes the effect of higher tariffs imposed by other countries on the United States, the effect of non-tariff measures that promote other countries' exports and obstruct U.S. exports, and other foreign economic policies favoring overproduction and degrading America's manufacturing capacity. This lack of reciprocity is an important driver of our global trade deficit and with particular countries. For example, the European Union can sell us all the shellfish they want, but the EU bans shellfish from 48 states. The result is a huge trade deficit in shellfish with the EU. We charge only a 2.5% tariff on ethanol, but Brazil charges us an 18% tariff. The result is we have a huge trade deficit in ethanol with Brazil. Our average tariff on agricultural goods is 5%, but India's average tariff is 39%. You get the picture. Our trade deficit, driven by these non-reciprocal conditions, is a manifestation of the loss of the nation's ability to make, to grow, and to build, and it's dangerous. And the president recognizes the urgency of the moment. On the very first day of his second term, President Trump issued a comprehensive memorandum setting out his trade policy direction. And over the past 10 weeks, he has executed on nearly all of these priorities. He has tightened tariffs on steel and aluminum, imposed new measures on auto and auto parts not made in the United States by American workers. On April 2nd, he declared his national emergency and imposed the reciprocal tariffs. The president's strategy is already bearing fruit. Over the past few weeks, a planned layoff for an auto production shift in Tennessee has been suspended. That shift continues to operate. Another automaker is hiring additional employees and expanding overtime to increase auto production in the United States. Companies have announced $4 trillion in new investment in the United States. Nearly 50 countries have approached me to discuss the president's new trade policy and explore how to achieve reciprocity. Several of these countries, such as Argentina, Vietnam, and Israel, have suggested they will reduce their tariffs and non-tariff barriers. These obviously are welcome moves. Our large and persistent trade deficit has been over 30 years in the making, and it will not be resolved overnight, but all of this is certainly in the right direction. We must move away from an economy based solely on the financial sector and government spending, and we must become an economy based on producing real goods and services by American workers in our communities here. This adjustment may be challenging at times. This is a moment of drastic and overdue change, but I'm confident that the American people will rise to the occasion as they've done before. I trust them. I trust that they can do this. I appreciate this committee's interest in President Trump's trade agenda, though we may not agree on everything and may have some severe disagreements at times. It's my hope that our shared interest in doing what's right for the country will allow us to collaborate in the coming weeks and months. Thank you again for your time, and I look forward to our conversation.
Thank you, Ambassador. We'll now proceed to the question and answer session. I'll start with the Vice Chair of our committee, Mr. Buchanan.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thanks for being here. USMCA, you did an incredible job and get a good chance to get to know you there. And we miss Bob Lighthizer as well in that process. But let me just say, being on the committee and being on trade for 10 or 14 years, whatever, we always seem like we come up short everywhere, even with our friends. Like Japan, I like Japan. I do business. I've done business with Japan. Still do some business with my kids with Japan. But you look at the trade deficit, they're monstrous. And you look at the number you just said, $1.2 trillion in terms of trade deficit. What are we going to do to change it? And I look back over 10, 12 years. Congress is dysfunctional as it relates to trade. We've done one trade deal. Maybe you might argue there was some supplements that were added. But we're not in the business. We're not engaged, and in terms of what's going forward. Now there's this discussion about doing some trade deals. What does that mean? What is that process? Because the process I went through on a couple of trade deals is onerous, and it takes time and effort, a lot of effort by a lot of people to get one deal done, let alone, trying to, let's say someone said there's 50 deals out there, people have an interest. What does that mean? And what's the process for that? So I guess I'm just tired as Americans losing. And like I said, I do business in Japan and other places, but I just hate to see we're always coming up short on most of these deals. And I look at our local area in Sarasota and Florida, in that region, and I look at tomatoes and vegetables, we're 600% surge, or 600% the surge on us. And we come up, and we've talked about that. We worked on that, last couple of 3-4 years, and it's there. Everywhere you look, we're short. And now here we are today. And where is this all going, the process? And what's your thoughts about how do we get, to me, idea of trade is at the end of the day, it's somewhat fair. Somewhat fair. It doesn't have to be perfect. Some countries, maybe you might give them a smaller country, work with them a little bit more. A lot of countries in Africa, it's one thing, try to give them some advantage. But these bigger countries, they're killing us. And they've been doing it on a long-term basis. So as the ambassador moving forward on trade, what's your thoughts?
Well, Mr. Buchanan, thank you. I think that's the right way to be thinking about this. The president has stated very clearly over the last few days that he is open to negotiate with countries that actually want to pursue reciprocal trade and get their trade deficit down with us, or where we have a surplus, give us the market access that we should have, so we can treat them like they treat us, and that it's better treatment all around. That's certainly part of this. In the very near term, I can just tell you, yesterday I had a meeting with my counterparts from the EU, from Korea, from Ecuador, and Mexico. And that was after talking to the Senate for 4 hours in the morning. So there are a lot of countries who understand exactly what the problem is that the president has set out and are willing to talk to us and willing to negotiate. And so I think in the near term, there is an opportunity for these countries, if they want to have more reciprocal trade, to bring down their differential tariffs, bring down their
I'm
non-tariff
going to run out of
barriers.
time. Let me
Yes, sir.
just ask you, is when you talk about these countries, and I heard there's 60, 80 of them, there's a lot of them that seem to have an interest, would want to do something. But what's your idea what that process is? I mean, like I said, it took 10 years to do one trade deal here. And what's your sense of what that process is going to be going forward to make that, if you get something negotiated, then what?
Well, so for example, in the very long term, for countries that think they want a comprehensive trade agreement or something broader, that's a longer term conversation that we have with Congress. Some of that might require, congressional action, of course, and we would want to be very tied in with you. In the very near term, in terms of the reciprocal tariff, countries are coming in essentially with a paper, right, or with a letter that they've sent me. I mean, Vietnam's a good example where they've just said, here are areas where we think.
Let me just say, because I got a few minutes. I agree. Hopefully that works out, but we do need to get back in the trade business in a serious way with the process that we have here in Congress, because this might work for some deals, but not all deals. But we have to get serious about trade, and at the end of the day, it needs to be fair. It might be a little one way or the other, but if we're buying their stuff, they need to be buying our stuff. And that's very clear to me. And I just feel so frustrated because I've watched this show for 10 years and we get little done. It's not Democrat or Republicans, it's both parties. We don't take the initiative on these fronts. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you. I recognize the ranking member, Mr. Neal.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Ambassador, your predecessor, Bob Lighthizer, and Catherine Tai, the eventual USTR, worked with Congress on USMCA. We had priorities. House Democrats worked with you to come up with what was a pretty good trade agreement. Again, almost universally supported in the House and the Senate. We had our priorities: intentional enforcement loopholes, addressing access to medicines, improving labor and environmental standards, and more. We included novel sunset provisions to give all sides a predictable and fair way to reflect and, if needed, course correct in the trading relationship. Now the president has imposed global tariffs with purported objectives of leverage to negotiate new trade agreements. Are you seeking to negotiate comprehensive trade agreements that address the range of labor, environmental, and corruption concerns? Or is it to seek leverage in the future of addressing these trade deficits in a more unbalanced or arbitrary manner? We know that trickle-down economics don't work, but that's what the administration seems to be doing. We're looking at tax cuts for wealthy people, aggressive deregulation, hollowing out essential government services. And let me, with long history, remind all, when NAFTA was negotiated by this committee, at that time, the Republican position was you could not amend a trade agreement. No human rights, no labor provisions, no enforcement mechanisms. That's what brought about the demise of NAFTA and our desire mutually to renegotiate for USMCA. So this idea that this all started in January, on January 20th, is simply not true. These agreements are not going to be worth the paper they're written on if we can say, with a review of USMCA coming up next year, that we're going to impose these tariffs in an arbitrary manner right now, leading to layoffs and plant closures because of them. My office is being inundated with calls about people and their 401k plans. They don't know what to expect. Trillions of dollars of market value being lost even as we meet. I understand the desire to address the issue of trade imbalances. It's important for all of us. But some of the suggestions have been clearly exaggerated as we've gone forward, hyperbolic to be sure. We need to go back to what we did, Mr. Ambassador, with USMCA, with a real solid negotiation that led to a desirable outcome. With that, I yield back my time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The Trade Subcommittee Chairman, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ambassador, for availing yourself here today on such important matters, and especially given the context, the broader context of timing I think I don't have to tell you these are important issues, and I am grateful for your service and certainly your intent and desire to move our country forward in many ways. I would say there's no such thing as stagnation in trade. We're either gaining ground or we're losing ground. And I think over the last 4 years, we lost a lot of ground. And during President Trump's first term, though, we made astounding progress through the negotiation of USMCA, the China Phase 1 agreement, U.S.-Japan trade agreement. These efforts unlocked new markets, strengthened supply chains, and empowered cooperation with important partners. Over the last 4 years, however, the Biden administration's trade agenda veered from slow-walked complacency to non-binding frameworks. Let me be very clear. The world was watching then, as it is now. It was watching as digital trade barriers, which disproportionately impact American companies, were built while USTR actively withdrew from digital trade negotiations at the WTO and in the Indo-Pacific. The world was also watching as a growing number of countries blocked market access for American agriculture with no scientific basis, and as the previous administration let negotiations with the UK and Kenya simply fade away. This was particularly concerning given Kenya stood to set an example for other AGOA beneficiaries, which are capable of negotiating their own bilateral reciprocal agreements. Consumers, producers, manufacturers, service providers, and our partners expected more. I'm encouraged by the growing list of countries seeking trade negotiations with the United States, including the UK, India, Japan, and South Korea. I am encouraged to also have you as USTR leading these discussions. It's clear President Trump has the world's attention, and it is up to his negotiators to ensure any agreements reached tear down the barriers affecting America's farmers, ranchers, and workers. While I do not expect perfection in the short term, we must find common sense solutions which level the playing field for our exporters, ensuring they receive fair treatment we have offered foreign partners, often unreciprocated, for too long. Over the last few months, our Trade Subcommittee has clearly outlined its priorities for trade enforcement and negotiations, I might add in a bipartisan fashion, and I hope you will look to the subcommittee's work to inform your agenda moving forward. I expect strong collaboration between USTR and Congress to create durable change in our trading relationships. During President Trump's first term, he teed up the agreements with the United Kingdom and Kenya. I am eager for these agreements to be brought to fruition. Ambassador Greer, could you elaborate on your engagement with these countries, Kenya and UK? How would you say you are ensuring our partners understand what progress is needed?
Thank you, Congressman. Over the past month, I've had a number of conversations with my counterpart in the United Kingdom. We've talked about non-tariff barriers in the UK. We've talked about ways to collaborate on technology. We've met frequently in person. We've had phone calls. We've had virtual meetings. And we've discussed how to move the relationship forward on an economic basis. I've certainly expressed my concern that the UK has barriers, especially in the ag space, that are very important for us. So that's been made clear to them. But those discussions are on a good footing. With Kenya, I also had my counterpart, the trade minister from Kenya, in town last week, and we sat down in my office. We had a good talk, and he said that he wanted to engage with the United States. He understands our concerns, but he also understands the need to move forward. It was a very fruitful conversation. I look forward to speaking with him again. He wants to work with us. They want to have some kind of agreement with us.
Okay, thank you. I want to say that USTR is a very lean, agile, and effective agency. Simultaneous negotiations with 50 plus countries would require significant bandwidth and expertise, as I'm sure you're aware. The chief IP negotiator, a role which has never been filled, and the chief ag negotiator, positions that Congress created in statute to ensure relevant issues important to the American people are addressed. When would you anticipate the president will nominate these positions to fill these positions? And in the meantime, how is USTR responding to the influx of requests and prioritizing negotiations?
So, Congressman, we have a couple of my deputies who have already been announced, and they're doing their rounds on the Hill or about to. We have an ag negotiator and a second deputy who are pending announcements. We're very close on that, so we're happy about that. In the meantime, the nature of these negotiations, the other countries know what the trade barriers are that we're talking about, and we're moving very quickly. We're meeting every day with several, trade ministers from other countries. The crack staff at USTR is working very hard as well to put together what would make sense in terms of near-term agreements with respect to the reciprocal trade.
Thank you. I think it's important to note that oftentimes, even if we have a trade agreement with a friendly country, for example, we still need to stay on top of these things, whether it's investor protections in Mexico or beef in Australia, with the expectation of a level playing field. So thank you again for being here. Look forward to the discussion.
Thank you.
Mr. Doggett.
Thank you, Ambassador. I have a number of yes/no answers, and if you feel you cannot answer them yes or no, just say you cannot, and I'll move on to the next question. The first of these, yes or no, the Trump tariffs will soon be levied on pharmaceuticals from abroad.
I'd like to discuss that more detail with you, sir.
Is that true or not?
Well, the president, he wants to get manufacturing production back here, and so he's going to conduct an investigation to see what's appropriate in terms of tariffs.
So he hasn't decided to impose them as he said he would last night at the Republican fundraiser.
He said that he will impose them. Now what the extent of that is subject to an investigation.
Reclaiming my time. A simple question, Ambassador. Yes or no, do you agree with the president's senior Trump trade advisor, Peter Navarro, that higher tariffs are tax cuts?
Sir, I don't get involved in the tax discussions, but we know tariffs have a revenue effect for sure.
You think tariffs are tax cuts?
I think that tariffs are an imposition on foreign goods that can protect American workers and American products.
And again, yes or no, do you agree with senior trade advisor Peter Navarro that as Americans watch their savings erode and the stock market losses approaching $7 trillion, that what Americans need is patience?
I think we all need to work through this period as we try to reshore and get over the $1.2 trillion deficit that Biden left us with.
Do you agree with Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick that we're not going to reverse course no matter how much the markets implode, and that these tariffs will be permanent?
Well, the president has directed that we're negotiating with willing partners, and that's where I'm keying my guidance from.
You just referenced the United Kingdom, and you have claimed that these trade deficits require these tariffs. Is it correct that large Trump tariffs were imposed on imports from close allies like the United Kingdom and Australia, even though we have a sizable trade surplus with each of those allies?
There's a global deficit, and those surpluses should probably be larger because of the barriers they have.
Again, sir, can you simply answer yes or no? Did we impose tariffs on allies with whom we have a trade surplus, not a trade deficit?
We impose tariffs on every country because it's a global problem.
So the answer is yes, even though you don't want to say it, apparently. Let me ask you also about experiences during the first Trump administration, because at that time, there was a discussion about the impact of the retaliatory tariffs from China on farmers. And as a result of that retaliation, there was a significant amount of farm welfare payments that were paid. We know this time that the tariffs and the retaliation are much broader, like the Chinese substituting Brazilian soybeans for American soybeans. Will American taxpayers be asked once again to finance welfare payments to farmers that lose foreign markets? Yes or no?
It's not clear yet whether that will be necessary.
Might have to and might not. Similarly, last time there were concerns about the selective nature and the exceptions that were made to these tariffs. And it seems that those who hired Republican contributors, lobby firms, did much better on exceptions. The whole exception process was criticized by the Government Accountability Office. Can I be assured that if one of my businesses hires a Republican lobbyist and contributor who can get a table down at Mar-a-Lago, that they will not get an exception to these tariffs or an exclusion?
There are no exceptions or exclusions to this program for the president.
All right. It's not one of my regular allies, but the National Taxpayers Union sent me a question yesterday, and I'll pose it to you as they did to me. They note that the United States has run trade deficits for 48 straight years, during which time the U.S. economy has grown by 255% in real terms. that these decades of trade deficits have corresponded with increases in American wealth and household incomes that far exceed the progress in Canada, China, and the European Union. Do you think that this growth in American wealth as a result associated with deficits is something that constitutes a national emergency?
The giant and massive persistent trade deficit that Biden left us with is an emergency. It's not like the small deficits from the 60s when we had auto workers here making production. We've offshored all this stuff, Mr. Doggett, and we are really in an emergency situation, and we're not passing the buck.
Time, we seem to have done much better than in the Gilded Age, which the president prefers. I would just say that on the eve of his inauguration, the president promised to bring prices drastically down, and there's nothing that you've said in your answers or non-answers to me today that will give Americans any assurance to believe anything other than that their prices will continue to soar and their savings will continue to shrink. The president's lies continue to cost the American people dearly. I yield back.
Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Chairman. Ambassador, thanks for being here. There's a quote in the movie Tora, Tora, Tora from Admiral Yamamoto, and he says, "What I fear is that we have awakened a sleeping giant." Thank God we've looked around at what's happening in the world. Twice America has gone to World War to save the world. We did it in World War I, we did it in World War II. And after World War II, the people that we saved and some of the people that we fought against were absolutely devastated. They had no way to build themselves back up again. So what did America do? We opened our markets because we have always been the most generous people in the world. And we're always the first responder, no matter what happens anywhere in the world. Who's there first? It's always the Yanks. We have ceded so much market share. We have rebuilt for most of the world an economy that they never could have achieved on their own. Now we're facing a situation with all of those who we've helped don't like us playing in their market. They love coming to America, but they don't want America coming to them. They make it very hard for us to do trade with them, whether it's through tariffs or barriers, which our manufacturers can't meet. And we sit here today trying to make this a political event instead of a country-saving event. I come from a little town called Butler, Pennsylvania. Butler at one time was a home of a steel mill. Still is. We built railroad cars. Pullman was there. We built the first Jeep. We were known as that town. Blue-collar town. People get up in the morning, work hard, and what they look for is that chance to get some overtime. Last summer, we became known as the town with the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. We're resilient. We always bounce back. We always will bounce back. And I got to tell you, I have some statements from the people that actually work every day. They get up and go to work, and they're looking at a market that they're constantly losing market share in, and they wonder who is going to stand up and do something. Who's finally going to talk about the real problems in America and quit talking about the stock market? Stop talking about all these other things, because I've watched it go up, I've watched it go down, I've watched it go sideways, I watched it where some people say, I don't like to play in that because I don't understand how it works. Here's the one thing I do know, and you know it too. It's all about work. It's all about market share. Jamie Sychek from UAW 3303, we were in a dire situation, not because of foreign competition. That hurt us a lot. We went from a steel plant that were 7,000 people down to there's about 1,300. We produced something called grain-oriented electric steel, the only producer of that product in America, and we were in danger of losing it because we had an administration that had a blind eye and a deaf ear to what they were giving up. Also, Jim Winnings, who operates a factory down in Mars, Pennsylvania, shares his view with me about how much market share they've lost. So I'm amazed when we try to turn this into a political battle and not a USA saving grace battle where we finally wake up. And just as Admiral Yamamoto feared in World War II, all we have done is to awake a sleeping giant. We have given away so much of our market and been denied access to other markets. We are the first responder every time something goes wrong in the world. I would just like to see the world treat us with the same respect as we have treated them. Level the playing field. That's all the president's asking for. Level the playing field. Don't make it impossible for us to play. Don't tell us, yes, you can come here as long as you meet these standards, knowing that the standards they've set, we can't meet. Yet we still allow them to come in. I sell Chevrolets. I sell Hyundais. I sell Kias. I sell Toyotas. And I sell Mitsubishis. People say, why is it that you have to do that? I said, to make payroll. Most of these companies have factories in the United States, and they have come here to help build, not to tear down with American workers. I really applaud what you're doing. I applaud the President of the United States for having the backbone to stand up and fulfill a pledge that others have made before him. They've stood on the floor of the Congress and talked about this and railed about what's happening to our markets and done not a damn thing about it. He stands up into a stiff wind and says, it's going to hurt for a while until we get back to where we need to be. It's always should be America first. And anybody that doesn't think that way, please tell me what the hell country you think you're going to take your wife and your kids to and your grandkids to. There is no other place in the world like America. And we have been so generous and so welcoming. And as I said earlier, we saved the world twice. Now it's time for us to say to the world, if you want us to be the first responder, you can't keep stealing our market and not allowing us to play in yours. Ambassador, you've got a hell of a task in front of you. The biggest task you have is this has become a political agenda and not as saving the United States of America. America first, please, for everybody. I am red, white, and blue. I could care less whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. Just wake up and understand that we cannot stand to lose any more market share, and we better be tough on this one, or we turn our backs on the future. And I've got 10 grandchildren. They're relying on me to stand up, and hopefully other members of this committee will do the same thing. This is not about tearing Trump down. This is about building America up. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ambassador, thank you for being here. I believe in our great country. I love our country. I put a uniform on and served in combat for our great country. And I'm not here to talk about politics. I'm here to talk about policy, trade policy today. And both the chairman and the ranking member talked about the USMCA. I was honored and privileged to be on that negotiating team when we negotiated that bill and was signed into law by President Trump in 2019. And at the time, the president said it's the best trade deal ever. And I'd like to submit this article into the record explaining what he said.
Without objection.
Now the president is shredding that deal, creating chaos in the world economy. The numbers speak for themselves. $3,800 higher prices for American consumers, 900 laid off U.S. auto workers, trillions in lost retirement savings, tens of billions in lost agricultural sales for farmers. The Trump administration says that the tariff taxes will raise $6 trillion over 10 years, which would be the biggest tax increase in our history. The message coming out of the administration isn't at all coherent. I'm having trouble, my constituents are having trouble understanding this. He puts a tariff on some 180 other countries, no tariff on Russia or Belarus or North Korea, and he's putting tariffs on UK, Ukraine, France, an island that only has penguins on it, but not a country that is clearly working against us and has a trade, we have a trade deficit with. It's confusing in every instance. He says that tariffs are here to stay, to support domestic manufacturing and to raise revenue to pay for tax giveaways to people who really don't need that tax giveaway help. And at the same time, he's saying that tariffs are part of a negotiation to secure better trade conditions and that this will be over soon. I'd like to know which it is, because it's not coherent at all. And I'd like to submit for the record documentation of his confusing priorities. And Mr. Ambassador, I'm at a loss to what I tell my constituents. As Mr. Neal said about his constituents calling, my phone's ringing off the hook. I'm getting emails every day. I see people on the street, they're asking. They want to know, a $6 trillion tax on the U.S. economy. What do you tell people when they ask that question? $3,800 higher prices for the average American family? What do I tell my constituents when they ask that question? The major agriculture, I have an ag district. My major agricultural producer just lost all access to the #1 foreign market to which they export their product. Not only has Canada closed the market, Canada has taken every U.S. product that my constituents send there off the shelves and off their web pages. And what do I tell them when they say, I've been working decades to build that market share and it's all gone that quick? What do you tell them? What do I tell my constituents who say, I have a container that it's already paid for of products coming in, and I will not be able to afford the tariff when that container lands? What do I tell my constituents who say we've lost trillions of dollars in our 401ks? How do I make that up? What do I tell my constituents when they say my kids are getting ready to go to college and my 529 is in the dumps? How am I going to pay for my kids' education? Wait, things are going to get better. Their kids are going to school now. They can't wait for stuff to get better. And pharmaceuticals, we had a hearing in the subcommittee yesterday on pharmaceuticals. And this tariff war is pricing pharmaceutical consumers out of the market. A 25% tax or tariff on pharmaceuticals. How are my constituents going to be able to afford their medications? This doesn't make any sense. This is an unprovoked tariff war that's costing us a lot of money with no confusing answer as to what we're doing, where we're going, or when we're going to get there. I yield back.
Mr. Schweikert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ambassador, just so I can clear my head, what's our trade balance with North Korea?
I don't think we have any trade. There's an embargo. A lot of those countries have embargoes
and
already.
that's so the rhetorical thing of you didn't tariff these countries, that we don't trade with them, but there's the problem is, sometimes our rhetoric doesn't have any basis in fact. Mr. Ambassador, the folks sitting behind you, is this your team?
This is our congressional staff who's been up meeting with all your
Okay,
office.
so that's congressional staff. Where I do have a concern, let's say both the left and the right, we agree we want to move as much robustness back to the United States. We, whether it be a manufacturing renaissance, whether it be in the service industry, those things. Okay. When you're doing your formulas, when you're advising the White House, others, do you spend some time on infrastructure issues? One of my personal fixations is pharmaceutical manufacturing, just looking at the steps in these things. We actually had testimony in this room 2 years ago. And it was, part of the discussion was, okay, we'd like to make precursor inputs into, small molecule drugs, except it produces some really nasty, toxic byproducts. And the United States doesn't have mitigation. We don't have ultra high temperature incineration, those things. So you want to build a policy to re-domicile pharmaceutical manufacturing in the United States. do you with your staff say, oh, but guys, we don't have the infrastructure mechanics to deal with the byproducts, the EPA permitting process to actually get the permits? Maybe we should approach Congress and say, hey, guys, I need you to help us get these things so we can actually, whether it be through tariffs or other incentives, move them. Do you spend time analyzing the infrastructure realities we have to actually be able to produce these products?
So yes, Congressman, absolutely. And when we talk about trade policy, which is in the news today because of the president's recent action, we're also talking about favorable tax policy, which is important for pharmaceutical production. We talk about permitting and environmental policy. All of these things go together. That's why President Trump had such a successful first term in terms of the economy, because all of it moved together, and we talk about that.
So what's happened in the last week? Would I find that somewhere? Look, in many ways, I'm finding myself, I support the ultimate goal. I'm just wondering if the sequencing has been done with the details that are necessary to make it successful. And then I've been waiting for the team to provide people like me the input saying, David, I need you to get off your backside, and we need this on permitting reform, or we need this on certain regulatory issues. And I haven't seen that input yet on, do you see where I'm going? Is if this is the ultimate goal, how do we get there? Is it straight through a tariff regime, or do we have to have our series of sequencing before this actually happens?
I think we certainly would welcome Congress supporting the reshoring of manufacturing. I think, unfortunately, during the last administration, we saw a lot of studies by the Biden administration about how to reshore pharmaceuticals, which is valuable. But we could kind of do studies for years and years and never reshore this.
So you have the information, so you have the studies, so you know what we need to do.
And the president can do what he can do, right? He doesn't have the power of the purse, but he can create incentives to drive people back.
This is beyond science. Even the infrastructure mitigation, it's not enough to say the company wants to get it back here in our country. They can't get the permit.
And that's why we're working closely with other economic cabinet members. We're talking about the importance of this. And I'll tell you, Administrator Zeldin and others, they're out there, they're trying to expedite permits. They're trying to make sure that regulations are appropriate to allow the kind of reshoring we need to.
So Ambassador, what do you need from us? What can we do? The ultimate punchline here is, what do you need from those as members of Congress who actually support the ultimate goal? A little concerned about the path, but ultimate goal. What do you need from us? And please bring that to us so we can actually do our work.
I have plenty of ideas. I'm happy to talk to the White House Office of Legislative Affairs about that. I think there's a lot Congress could do if they would like to.
We look forward to those documents. Thank you, Mr. Messer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Larson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and Ambassador Greer. Welcome to the committee. Thank you for all your service. I just have a direct question because I'm a little puzzled. Being a great James Bond fan, I was kind of wondering what this whole deal is to Russia with love, and why, as has been pointed out, that on April the 2nd, the president excluded Russia, Belarus, Cuba, and North Korea from the new global tariff. The Treasury sector said Russia wasn't on the list because they already imposed sanctions to prevent most U.S.-Russia trade, making higher tariffs unnecessary. The question's kind of twofold. Is that the case with Russia, Belarus, Cuba, and North Korea? While trade in goods has decreased, trade with Russia is still significant. Last time I checked, it's like 3.5 billion, well above the volumes of trade for many smaller countries that my colleagues have already been through that are impacted by this. So first, was this an oversight? Or is the president trying to reinvigorate trade with Russia?
So there's no effort to reinvigorate trade with Russia. Congress did the right thing a couple of years ago and revoked permanent normal trade relations with Russia, so put in the bad category. And so Belarus, Russia, North Korea, they already have their own high tariffs already in a category that Congress has established.
So it doesn't matter. They're not part of this.
Well, it does matter. They already have these high tariffs. They don't have permanent normal trade relations. We have normal trade relations with these others. I think if there's
so
trade
why
with
are
Russia,
the penalties that much more? Why are the tariffs that much more higher on other country and allies than they are in Russia? Because we're already doing enough with Russia?
No, it's because in the sanctions law, there's always an exclusion for agricultural products. And I think that's the only type of trade we really have with Russia. But all of those folks, they're sanctioned, they're subject to embargoes of one type or another. Congress revoked permanent normal trade relations. And that's certainly the right answer for those folks. We should not have normal trade relations with those countries.
Well, let me ask you this then. Would you commit here that if we see trade increasing from last year, that USTR will take action to increase tariffs on Russia?
Oh, I'm happy to monitor that and advise the president accordingly. I agree with you.
I'm sorry, what?
I'm happy to monitor that and advise the president
What
accordingly.
does that mean? You're going to monitor that?
Well, you asked if we would see if the would change, if we would see if the trade level would change. I'm agreeing with you. I'm happy to see if the trade level
And
with Russia changes.
if it does increase, you will add additional tariffs.
Well, it's the president's choice, but I'll advise him and I'll say this is affecting the trade deficit. We should consider this.
So
sure.
does that mean you would advise him to raise the tariffs with Russia?
Well, I don't typically give out my advice to the president out in public, but I agree with you.
I'm sure the American people would love to know, and as with members of Congress. I mean, you gotta kind of admit it is just if you casually follow the news, you're not a member of this committee, and the relationship with Russia is kind of bizarre in terms of what it is between President Trump and President Putin, and why this relationship exists. So you can imagine. I don't know. Have you ever been to Augie and Ray's?
No, I haven't.
You should. It's a great spot in East Hartford. It's right next to Pratt Whitney Aircraft, et cetera. And they're deeply concerned about this. And they always say, hey, what's going on with Russia and what's going on with the president and Putin? So I'm going to be able to tell them, don't worry. I spoke with Ambassador Greer, and currently Russia's apparently paying enough. Their sanctions already are sufficient. But if we see greater activity and great trade amounts, we're going to make sure that tariffs are levied on them. Is that a fair thing to say?
Well, on the last part, I can't make the president's decision for him, right? I mean, Russia.
But you would recommend that you would increase tariffs on them.
Well, I'm not going to disclose my recommendations.
So we're not going to recommend, we're not going to say, see, at Augie and Ray's, they would say, hey, come on, you're BSing us now. We know what's going on here. But with that, thank you, Ambassador, and appreciate your time. I yield back.
Mr. LaHood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ambassador Greer, welcome back. Thank you for your prior service under the last Trump administration and all the work you put in on USMCA, and happy to see you in this new position. I wanted to talk about agriculture and get your take on how tariffs affect agriculture. My district that I am proud to represent is the 10th largest ag district in the country in terms of corn and soybean production. The number one industry in the state of Illinois is agriculture. People are surprised by that. Illinois has led the nation the last 12 years in soybean production. We've been second in corn production the last 6 years. And my district, we load up a lot of commodities on barges on the Illinois and the Mississippi River. They go down to New Orleans, they get offloaded, and they go all around the world. About 40% of the corn and soybeans in my district, again, go to places all across the globe. And so markets and customers are very, very important. And I will just say at the outset that I appreciate what President Trump is doing in terms of addressing longstanding trade deficits and bringing down barriers to trade, and also your commitment for looking for new trade deals and entering into negotiations to address tariff and non-tariffs. across the globe. But as I talk to my farmers, there's a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, a lot of uncertainty, because when we get into a trade war, usually the first pawn in the trade war is agriculture. And as we look at the timeline and chronology moving forward, Ambassador Greer, what would you tell my farmers in terms of that uncertainty and anxiety that they're feeling right now?
Well, the first thing to note is that almost all countries have announced that they're not going to retaliate against the United States. Obviously, we have China that has made its own choice. They've always given us a hard time. They've always limited our access over there, and they're doubling down on that path. That's an issue of Chinese agency. Indonesia, India, so many other countries have affirmatively said we're not retaliating. And those are actually many of the countries that are coming to us and saying we're willing to take down our tariffs. Vietnam unilaterally decided to reduce its tariffs on apples, cherries, certain corn products, ethanol, et cetera. So we're already seeing the kind of movement we would expect. And that's something that I think is an important message to our farmers.
Thank you for that. I want to switch topics to digital trade. And I believe we have a tremendous opportunity in digital trade, and the United States must lead in setting global rules and standards. We can't allow non-market adversaries like China in particular to set these standards and further manipulate the digital trade agenda. Unfortunately, under the Biden administration, we ceded this authority, and we've seen the consequences of discriminatory policies hurting U.S. innovation. I think we can be aggressive working with our like-minded partners and allies to build on the progress made during President Trump's first administration, including the digital agreement with Japan and the robust standards set in the digital chapter of USMCA, which is, in my view, kind of the gold standard for future trade agreements. What can you say today, Ambassador Greer, on how you view the expanding U.S. leadership in digital trade moving forward in this administration?
Well, I think it's a huge comparative advantage that we have. Our digital commerce companies and digital trade companies are the most competitive in the world. And they're competing with ones from China. And in that competition, we have to win. And if I have other countries discriminating against our champions, that's bad for America, it's bad for our companies and workers, and it's bad for the world. And I know we're having a national conversation, politically on how to regulate, digital tech, et cetera. But in no case can we allow discrimination to undermine our competitive advantage here.
Thank you, Ambassador Greer. I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Davis for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ambassador. It is important that the executive administration respect and recognize that Congress has authority over trade agreements, and its purpose is to guide and/or direct the administration on the content of that agreement. Unfortunately, what we have seen from the Trump-Musk administration in the trade and tariff space over the past month has been anything but comprehensive, well-balanced, and measured. In fact, the president's recent approach to advancing his America First trade policy has been confusing, chaotic, inconsistent, and at times even contradictory. Ambassador Greer, I represent companies in the vehicle supply industry that assemble and produce parts for the automotive industry. The vehicle supplier industry employs more than 930,000 people directly and 4.8 million indirectly. Individuals across the country representing the largest sector of manufacturing jobs in the United States. Tariff impact on the automotive industry is massive and may result in shutting down businesses within the automotive supply chain, which will harm the U.S. economy as a whole. The automotive supply chain is not agile in its ability to make changes. However, the motor vehicle parts sector and many others have adjusted supply chains to support more regional production. My question is, since it would take years to adjust production and supply chains back to the U.S., In the meantime, the auto sector will be hit with multiple layers of tariffs that will soak up any free cash that could be used for the very investments in the U.S. that the administration is seeking. Is the administration planning any relief for auto part suppliers and the auto industry? And what other help can the government provide to these suppliers due to the most recent changes in tariffs?
So, Congressman, the autos action is under the Department of Commerce. I'll just make two brief points. First of all, right now, if the parts comply with USMCA rules of origin, the agreement we all agreed to 5 years ago, they continue to come across duty-free. So that's a good development. And second, the United Auto Workers are huge supporters of the action on autos and auto parts. And they put out a long statement supporting this long overdue issue. We have Chinese vehicles flooding global markets. The only reason they're not in this market is because President Trump put a tariff on Chinese automobiles in 2018, and the Biden administration kept them and put them in place. It's really critical that we protect our auto industry, and the auto workers understand that. We've accounted for parts that have U.S. content and content from Canada and Mexico, and we have to be very deliberate about doing this to save this industry.
Thank you. And let me ask you, have you conducted an analysis on the net impact of tariffs across different sectors of the economy? And what steps is your office taking to mitigate negative employment effects?
So with respect to, we have a lot of historical data about tariffs. For example, the International Trade Commission, they put out a report following the Trump first term tariffs, and they found that there were positive effects on domestic production in terms of employment and better profits for domestic production. We know in the first term, when we put tariffs in place, inflation went down, unemployment went down, and real median household income went up. We expect that with good energy policy, good trade policy, good tax policy, good permitting regulatory processes, this can all rise together to again lead to an increase in real median household income for Americans.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back and now recognize Mr. Estes for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ambassador Greer, for joining us today and taking time out of your schedule to meet with us. Ambassador, I just welcome you again to the Ways and Means Committee, which has the sole jurisdiction for trade issues in the House. It's great to have you here working with administration that prioritizes free and fair trade, unlike the previous administration, which placed pretty much zero emphasis on trade enforcement and on new deals with foreign nations, in effect putting America last. I represent Kansas 4th District, the air capital of the world, which is a microcosm of the United States. We have large aerospace manufacturing core in Wichita, as well as other manufacturing operations, and a widespread agriculture base in the surrounding rural counties. This cross-section of the country every day works to feed, clothe, and provide energy for the entire world. Additionally, skilled workers manufacture airplanes and aerospace components, build computer instruments that power our devices. And it's an understatement to say that our district benefits from free and fair trade, because when Kansas compete on an even term, we win. The aviation industry has benefited from historical 0-for-0 tariff with foreign nations since the 1980s. Nearly every single airplane around the globe contains at least one component made in Kansas. In contrast, our agriculture sector faces stiff barriers with foreign nations. As illustrated in your testimony, ethanol product produced in Kansas faces a steep 18% tariff in Brazil, while the same Brazilian product is only charged a tariff of 2.5%. This type of unfair, excessive tariff on U.S. exports is undefensible. Because of this, I support the administration's efforts to reduce the tariff barrier placed on U.S. products by foreign competitors. And I'm pleased to see the number of countries, 70 plus or so, that have mentioned that they want to make a deal. I'd also like to discuss some non-tariff barriers that functionally disadvantage the U.S. in comparison to our trading partners. I've been a vocal opponent of digital services taxes, DSTs, These extraterritorial taxes enacted by many countries, including France, Canada, and UK, are highly targeted on U.S. businesses and innovators. Many of my colleagues agree that DSTs are a revenue grab by countries that restrict technology, innovation, and envy American companies that are successful in this space. Additionally, in the recently released 2025 National Trade Estimate Report on foreign trade barriers, I was pleased to see the USTR include Germany's extraterritorial assertion of retroactive taxes, known as the Section 49. This law has been dormant for the past 100 years, but disproportionately targets U.S. businesses. These examples aren't from our adversaries, they're from our friends. And these are just a few examples of why it's so important to level the playing field and open markets for American manufacturers and producers, the very effort that you're trying to put in right now. Regarding Germany's Section 49, I believe reaching a resolution on this issue is important. In consulting with Treasury and IRS, it's my understanding that they've engaged with some affected taxpayers and German officials on this issue, but it's yet to be resolved. What's your strategy in terms of working on this issue with Germany, and will you work with me and my staff and the committee as we pursue a resolution for this issue?
First of all, I always like talking to you, Congressman, because as you know, I lived in Wichita for 2.5 years and served at the Air Base when I was in the Air Force and had a child born there. So we have a nice connection there. I will work with Secretary Bessent on this issue with Section 49. I've had some good interactions with my German counterpart in the past couple of weeks, and we're happy to work with you on this to see what the best way forward is.
Yep. Well, thank you. And I know some of that crosses over, as you mentioned, with Treasury Secretary and the issues there. And there's so many things moving on in your direct sphere of influence with all activities trying to make sure that there's free and fair trade for American companies and American competitors. And I just applaud your efforts in helping make putting America first in these efforts. And thank you. And I yield back.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Ms. Sanchez for 5 minutes.
Thank you. As the ranking member of this committee's trade subcommittee, I want to say a few words about President Trump's latest scheme, his so-called reciprocal tariffs. Let's start by making one thing perfectly clear. These tariffs are not reciprocal. But don't just take my word for it. According to the Wall Street Journal, the president's tariff scheme is not reciprocal, nor is it based on measuring foreign trade barriers. Before getting into Trump's latest scheme, I just want to note that I recently returned from a NATO bureau meeting, and I witnessed firsthand how President Trump's chaotic trade decisions have damaged our global leadership with our allies. And it's appalling to see how Trump is treating our friends and allies compared to how he's treating our adversaries. It was mentioned that under this tariff scheme of Trump's, Russia gets a free pass, while our allies, including those who stood with us after the terrorist attacks of 9/11, are hit with increasing tariffs. Russia's tariff rate is 35%, and we have hit our trading partners with far higher tariffs. It's sad to say that our NATO allies don't trust us anymore. So his scheme isn't just damaging our economy, it's actually undermining our longstanding security partnerships around the world. And in addition to undermining our relationships with our allies, Trump's scheme imposes randomly high tariffs on numerous countries, including our FTA partners. For instance, under the Korea-US Free Trade Agreement, Korea eliminated tariffs on most goods from the United States. Last year, Korea's effective tax rate for goods imported from the United States was less than 1%, yet Trump has imposed a 25% tariff on South Korea. Trump repeatedly insisted that he wanted to impose the same tariffs on other countries as they impose on us. And I want to read a quote from the president, quoting him, "On trade, I have decided for purposes of fairness that I will charge a reciprocal tariff, meaning whatever countries charge the United States of America, we will charge them no more and no less." But as we now know, that is not true. That is completely false. And because it isn't true, the Trump administration came up with a fake formula to justify this tariff scheme. Now, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that the trade studies called for by the president in January and the so-called reciprocity rationale of his latest trade scheme are completely bogus. It's made up. To understand why Trump is pursuing this crazy scheme, you need to understand his MO. First, he threatens a huge tariff. Second, he tries to use those tariffs as leverage to extort countries. Many of them are allies. And third, he declares anything that they promise as a huge victory, even when it's an insubstantial deal meant only to appease Trump and his cronies. And fourth, repeat this corrupt practice over and over again. This is all intended to distract and divert the media's attention. I urge everybody to take a step back from the daily chaos that comes out of the White House to consider the bigger picture here. Trump should not fool around with the economy. American families should not be forced to pay higher prices to fund tax cuts for the rich, which leads me to suspect that these tariffs are not temporary in nature because they need the revenue to give tax cuts to the wealthy. Trump shouldn't fool around with workers. Workers are pawns. Instead of this chaos, workers need robust industrial policy paired with workforce development and targeted tariffs to reshore certain American industries. Yet the president doesn't have a comprehensive plan to do any of that. Trump shouldn't fool around with our democratic values. Trump's trade agenda is all being done behind closed doors. There's no transparency. Backroom deals are corrupt and they're anti-democratic. As members of Congress, we need to reassert our voice in the face of Trump's insane trade policies. Republicans need to stand with Democrats and decisively call out Trump's harmful tariff scheme. As I said in our previous hearing, House Democrats are open to new trade agreements with partners that are committed to advancing workers' rights, protecting the environment, defending human rights, and safeguarding our intellectual property. Unfortunately, the president's corrupt tariff scheme is trampling on our Constitution by sidelining Congress's jurisdiction over trade. Let this administration's record in trade policy and elsewhere serve as a grave warning, and there is no denying that this president and his cronies are rapidly working to consolidate power. With that, Trade Representative Greer, I have a couple of questions for you. In the April 2nd announcement, did the president issue tariffs on the European Union, Japan, and South Korea? Yes.
Yes, every country.
Okay, I don't need an explanation. I just need a yes or no answer. Did the president issue any new tariffs on Russia, Cuba, North Korea, or Belarus?
They already have sanctions embargoes, so no.
No, the question was yes or no. I recently read news reports indicating that you are the new head of the Office of Special Counsel. Is that correct?
I'm the acting head. That's correct.
And you currently serve as USTR. With the trade wars, don't you think that your time should be focused exclusively on trade? And isn't it a gross conflict of interest to be the body that oversees your own agency and position?
Oh, I certainly would recuse myself if there was an issue involving
Well,
me.
I think it's ridiculous that you hold both, and I urge you to resign as special counsel. It makes no sense for you to have oversight over yourself. That's not true oversight. And with that, I yield back.
Member's time has expired. I now recognize Mr. Smucker for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hello, Ambassador. I want to thank you for the work that you're doing, for the change that you're working to bring about. And I also want to point out the differences that we've seen in the past 4 years of the Biden administration compared to the 4 years of the Trump administration, specifically in regards to trade. I think Democrats and Republicans alike were very unhappy with the past administration's approach to trade, basically, which was to do nothing, to try to generate new agreements and to not do nothing to try to open markets up for American manufacturers, to do nothing to try to bring jobs back to America. And that's just in such stark contrast to what we saw during the previous Trump administration. He had a bold and effective approach to trade, one that really delivered prosperity and brought our trading partners to the table. So We appreciate the work that the president did during his previous administration. We appreciate the work that he's doing and that you're doing on trade. It's a refreshing change to what we've seen over the past 4 years. And we trust the president to get this right again. We believe that we're seeing already the impact when you have tens, I don't know how many we're up to now, but countries coming to the table that have for a long time had tariffs in place for our goods, but we weren't doing the same. And so the idea of reciprocal trade, I think, is a great one that I can tell you the American people in my district, business owners in my district, very much support, and they support the goals of this administration to bring back manufacturing jobs to the country, to bring back that investment in the country, and then to open up markets to our great American businesses. So I will also say this: many of those business owners who love what the president is trying to accomplish are feeling a little consternation. They're concerned about what this, how we're going to achieve what the intent is here. They still believe in what the president is doing, as I think every, at least Republican member here, agrees with that. But I just want to give you an opportunity, if you don't mind, to just sort of expand maybe on some of the things that you've said previously, but with that sort of audience in mind. What would you say to, for instance, a copper manufacturer in my district who you and I have spoken about previously, but this is impacting their business in a big way? And what would you say to other businesses who are in a similar situation? And maybe if you could just paint a picture of what success will look like here, again, in the context of the successes that we've seen with USMCA negotiated under previous administration, all that, but take us out a few months, take us out a few years. What is the end goal here? I think I know what that is, but I'd love to give you a chance just to expand on that. What will success look like? How will that help every American business? Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. I think we'll find that American businesses are much more competitive when they have open markets overseas. People talk about the high cost of doing business in America and manufacturing in America and growing in America. But when we cannot access foreign markets, or we face barriers overseas, and not just tariffs, but also all the non-tariff barriers that we've outlined in this 400-page book, that increased costs. And it makes it difficult to be competitive globally and even domestically. At the same time, we have foreign producers who receive subsidies. They have countries where economic policies depress domestic demand. They make more stuff than they can consume. They send it here. And so I think what we're going to see in the near term, we're going to see a handful of partners who open their markets more to us, and it makes it much easier and much more competitive economically to have manufacturing here, to grow products here, to process them here, and export them to the rest of the world. So it's a virtuous cycle that you create when you create a situation where you have open markets, you create broader economic policies, whether it's good tax policy, good energy policy, to give you the tailwind you need. We have to reshore manufacturing. This is the important way to do it. We can have tariff protection as we get rid of the trade deficit, reshore manufacturing, and as other countries open their markets, they can potentially have a different arrangement that helps us as we try to have reciprocal trade and get rid of the deficit and get back to being a producing economy. That's where we need to be.
Well, thank you again for your work. I'm out of time, but appreciate your work, and we're with you. Thanks.
Thank you. Rest of the world. So it's a virtuous cycle that you create when you create a situation where you have open markets, you create broader economic policies, whether it's good tax policy, good energy policy, to give you the tailwind you need. We have to reshore manufacturing. this is an important way to do it. We can have tariff protection as we get rid of the trade deficit, reshore manufacturing, and as other countries open their markets, they can potentially have a different arrangement that helps us as we try to have reciprocal trade and get rid of the deficit and get back to being a producing economy. It's where we need to be.
Well, thank you again for your work. I'm out of time, but appreciate your work and we're with you. Thanks.
Thank you.
I now recognize Ms. Sewell for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Ambassador. It was a pleasure working with you on USMCA, and for what it's worth, I still believe that USMCA is a gold standard for our trade agreements that we make. It was done so with Congress and the executive, and that should be the standard. Unfortunately for both of us, President Trump has decided that he doesn't want to work with Congress and that he is not bound by our Constitution or trade laws. President Trump has unilaterally imposed the largest tax increase on working families in decades by implementing broad tariffs that are crashing the economy and threatening the livelihoods of so many working families in Alabama and all across America. Moreover, he is doing so by abusing the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEMPA, clearly states that the president can only use this authority in response to, quote, unusual and extraordinary, end quote, threats. However, both you and the president have described the trade deficit as persistent. I don't know how you can claim that our trade deficit is persistent and at the same time use an emergency authority which requires it to be, quote unquote, unusual. My question to you, I have a series of questions, and really I just want a yes or no answer. As our trade representative, do you believe there are any restriction on President Trump's emergency authority, or do you believe that President Trump has unlimited power to tariff any country for any reason? Yes or no?
Congress has put a number of limitations on that authority.
So is that a no?
It is not unlimited. It's not unlimited.
Did President Trump ask you, or do you believe that using the emergency authority for this purpose of trade deficit is legal?
Of course it's legal, yes.
Do you believe Congress has any role in providing oversight of this administration's implementation of tariffs?
Certainly, that's why I'm here today.
Many of us on this committee have serious concerns that foreign nations will be pressured into negotiating as a result of this. And those negotiations could also extend to them purchasing the Bitcoin with the president's name and face on it. That would be illegal, right?
I have never looked into Bitcoin purchases by foreign countries.
Reclaiming my time. With this, are tariffs regressive or are they progressive tax?
Well, tariffs can protect, and that's why the United Auto Workers want them in place and have cheered the tariffs.
I'm reclaiming my time. Who spends a higher portion of their income on goods, the wealthy or working class?
I think the more wealthy have a higher percentage of consumption overall in the United States.
Well, according to the Tax Foundation, a conservative entity, how things are distributed are more regressive and put a higher burden on lower income households more than higher income households.
The top 10% of incomes account for about 50% of consumption.
They do. And so I think for what I'm getting at, Mr. Ambassador, is that my Alabama constituents are very, very worried. I was home this weekend and Miss Jackie, who owns Reflections, a coffee shop in Selma, Alabama, right near the Edmund Pettus Bridge, a place that she couldn't have, when she was growing up in Selma, go into, she now owns. It's a coffee shop, and she's really, really worried that the price of coffee will go up so high that she will not be able to keep her store. And she just, this is year number 3. It's a very popular store, but in little Selma, Alabama, where the price of coffee is already $5, $4.99, increasing it even more would shut her down. And so my constituents have lots of questions to me and to, and to this president with respect to why we are choosing to go down this path. His tariffs amount to the largest tax increase on those families. It's bad for Alabama farmers who are facing retaliatory tariffs. It's bad for consumers who will see prices skyrocket. It is horrible for those who are retired and depend upon their retirement to live, and seeing the stock market go out of control. So, sir, this is really dire for a lot of folks that I represent. Dire for a lot of folks that I represent. And we can't wait for things to get better. And so I really urge you and the president to think about the least of these, the most vulnerable in our society, and how they're going to weather the storm. And to my Republican colleagues here on this committee, I hope that you will push back on these escalating, sweeping tariffs that have done so much damage to our economy. Thank you. I'm going to go back.
Members' time has expired. I now recognize Mr. Hearn for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here today, Mr. Ambassador. I really appreciate you being here to recognize the relationship between the executive branch and Congress as it relates to trade. So thank you. You know, over the last 4 years, trade has been neglected at best, and it's long past time for a real trade agenda and a president who wants to strengthen America, not cede its interests to foreign governments. As a matter of fact, the American people elected President Trump in November under the premise that he would rebalance trade with our allies and others around the world, bring manufacturing back to the United States, to create high-paying jobs in America, make things in America. And as you just alluded to, it's been applauded by many people, including our great auto workers, as they talk about reconstituting those manufacturing jobs where they're needed most. You mentioned in your testimony that Israel is one of the countries looking to negotiate, and to my knowledge, they were the first to remove all tariffs for the United States. It is heartening to hear that our allies are coming to the table and taking quick action to remove trade barriers with the United States. Last Congress, I introduced a resolution in support of the free trade agreement we have with Israel as a way to support one of our greatest allies as they face an existential threat from Iran and its terror proxies. I appreciate President Trump's strong support of Israel, and I hope that this first step by Israel to move to a zero tariff policy will lead the way to an even stronger trade and economic relationship between our two countries. Trade policy should reflect not only economic interests, but also national security and ideological alignment. Strengthening relationships with allies who share American values is essential to reducing reliance on adversarial nations. Mr. Ambassador, how can we ensure our trade policies prioritize strategic allies like Israel and Taiwan who share American values and are willing to join us in enacting common policies to counter our adversaries?
Thank you, Congressman. I'm happy to report that Sunday night I had a meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu about this very issue. And the Taiwanese have also reached out. So this is something where we're having close, high-level talks about how to move forward. I would also say, as we talk to our allies, we're encouraging them and hoping that they will align with us on things like export controls and investment screening to make sure that as we trade with them, we're trading in a way that increases our economic security and not just our economic growth.
We know calculations are going on and into the reciprocal tariffs, include more than just tariffs other countries place on the United States. And as you're undergoing negotiation with our allies, is the president and your office taking into consideration things like export controls, as you just mentioned, foreign military sales, foreign direct investment as it relates to their relationship with the United States?
So we certainly consider those things and appreciate them. Remember, with foreign direct investment, because they export so much to us, they have all these hard dollars, and the best place to put them is here. And so that's kind of a natural outgrowth. We are very focused on making sure that we have a trading goods that is fair and make sure that we're not getting dumped on or have overcapacity overflowing into the U.S. and that we have export market opportunities. But we certainly are encouraged by and the $4 trillion in new investment that's been announced by foreign companies.
Are military sales included in that?
So that's a good question. We've thought about that. When you look at the trade numbers, I think foreign military sales, official ones, don't normally show up in those trade numbers. But I know that's been raised by several of our allies. And of course, we want our technology to be the technology that allies are using.
The last 4 years under former President Biden, USTR fell to adequately address discriminatory extraterritorial taxes and digital trade barriers harming American companies. Last year, I raised concerns with Ambassador Tai when USTR failed to include digital trade barriers in the 2024 National Trade Estimate, the NTE, report on foreign trade barriers. The internet and digital technologies have revolutionized commerce, enabling businesses of all sizes to access global markets and consumers like never before. However, this potential is being undermined by the rise of digital trade barriers imposed by some of our trading partners. Those barriers come in various forms, from data localization requirements to discriminatory regulations and censorship measures. That not only stifles innovation and economic growth, but also undermines the competitiveness of American business in the digital age. In 2023, the U.S. exports of digitally enabled services accounted for 64% of all U.S. exports, and the U.S. had nearly $300 billion in digital trade surplus. Will you make it a priority to, unlike the last administration, to address this digital trade barrier?
Yes, we're focused on this. We're not political or choosing sectors we like or don't like. And we've recorded in the trade estimate this year different digital trade barriers. Obviously, Congress is going to, regulate and decide how we're going to, manage digital trade, competition, those kinds of things. But we just can't have discrimination. And I won't accept that by our foreign trading partners, especially in this area where we're so competitive.
I want to thank you again for coming here and appreciate you answering everyone's question. Again, it shows the understanding of the relationship between the executive branch and Congress as it relates to trade. Thank you again. Appreciate it. I yield back.
Ms. Del Bene.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for being with us today. Tax day came early this year, came on April 2nd, since Trump's sweeping tariffs are raising prices for American families by $4,600 this year, according to the latest estimates. It keeps going up. Families are struggling. Businesses are panicking. I talked to a business in my district that talked about being tariffed out of business. We have businesses who have a lot of export, who manufacture right here in the U.S. and export, who are losing business. Even Republicans are beginning to break with the president. We've seen several joint bills that would make clear that the president does not have the ability to single-handedly impose sweeping tariffs. The real question we're all wondering is, how do we get out of this mess that Trump has created? Chairman Smith recently said he hopes that the Trump tariffs will give USTR leverage to negotiate new trade deals. But Ambassador, how can any country trust the U.S. enough to make a trade deal? Given that Trump has thrown out existing trade deals like Australia or South Korea, or even USMCA, which he negotiated and Congress enacted, how are people going to trust us when arbitrarily these deals are being thrown out?
Congresswoman, thank you. The United States remains the consumer market of choice for everybody. And I hear some of these Wall Street analysts, predicting, imminent catastrophe. And that's just, when we look back at Trump 1, we put tariffs on China and we reinvigorated NAFTA to be USMCA. We saw real household medium income go up. We saw inflation go down, unemployment go down, and the countries are coming to us every day. We're having several meetings with them every day to do these deals. So they're not showing hesitance. It's quite the opposite.
But if we have a deal that's being blown up, then you can say you're negotiating a deal. 2 seconds later, you can throw it out. What kind of deal is that? Are these deals that you're supposedly negotiating, are they going to come to Congress for a vote like USMCA did?
These are deals. So first of all, if we did a comprehensive free trade agreement, of course we would come to Congress, et cetera, and we will certainly keep Congress up to speed on any kind of
deal that you do. Are you going to bring that to Congress for a vote?
We'll do it. We'll do what the law requires. Some of it's consultation, some requires a vote. So we'll follow the law on that front. But the countries are coming, right? If they were hesitant, they wouldn't be knocking down.
But I don't understand what the countries are coming to do. You put tariffs in place, sweeping tariffs with no specifics in terms of what the goals are, no plans. And then you say countries are coming to what? To individually negotiate with President Trump, and it's his whim what's acceptable or not acceptable?
So for example, I get a letter from the Vietnamese, which I received recently, and it outlined a number of tariff lines where they want to reduce their tariffs and non-tariff barriers that they want to remove. And they want to engage with us on reciprocal trade.
But what are the objectives of the negotiation? You didn't lay those out. The plan, there's no plan that was laid out by the president. I've seen no plan from USTR on what the goal of the tariffs are. We're damaging companies. We've thrown out existing trade deals that we already have. And now you say there's a negotiation with no clear goal what that negotiation is or whether or not Congress is going to have a vote on a potential deal?
So we have a 20-page order laying out the basis for the order and the emergency we're facing, which is the trade deficit that President Biden left us with, the offshoring that it represents, the non-tariff barriers that it represents, and we're looking to eliminate that. And a tariff is a way to do that. And if a country has an alternative method that they think will help us meet those goals, we're happy
Can we
to
talk about the emergency powers of the emergency power statute that Trump invoked, IEPA, to impose his tariff? It states the president in every possible instance shall consult with Congress before exercising any powers. That didn't happen.
Our staff came, our USTR staff came up to Congress and did consult. I've had
With who? With what
phone
members?
calls
With
and
what
meetings.
members of Congress did you consult with? I'm a member of the Ways and Means Committee. I'm a member of the Trade Subcommittee.
I called both the chairman and the ranking member the day before, the morning of.
So you,
My
if you
staff
talk to,
came up and briefed.
if you call
It's my
to, how could you consult with folks when there wasn't even a deal that was proposed? In fact, it wasn't till April 2nd when the tariffs were put in place. No one even knew what exactly was going to happen. There was nothing to consult on. So how did that consultation take place?
I had a phone call with Chairman Smith and Ranking Member Neal.
About a non-existent deal.
Well, I told them about the IEPA action that was coming, and I sent my staff up here to brief the committee staff as well.
So I argue now we did not have that consultation. Here we are. There was no plan in place. There's no plan in place going forward. The American people are hurting. And now in the rule vote that we're going to have just after we are done with this hearing, Republicans are already putting in a provision to make sure that they don't have to vote on the tariffs that are in place. Congress should have a role here. It's terrible that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle aren't willing to have a vote too. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Ms. Miller.
Thank you, Chairman Smith. Welcome, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you for being here. It's my opinion that part of the reason President Trump has taken such drastic action on trade is due to the fact that there was no trade agenda under the Biden administration. And I didn't hear any sniping from the other side about that. The past administration's failure to engage in meaningful conversations with our trade partners opened the door for countries to run afoul of the World Trade Organization tariff agreements and to impose excessive non-tariff barriers. These countries have had no incentive to negotiate, and they've been massively benefiting from the system as it is. For example, in my state, the hardwood companies have been pummeled by China, dumping their hardwood in the American market. China gained at our expense while we were asleep at the wheel. Thankfully, that is not the policy of the United States today. Due to President Trump's swift action, more than 70 countries are knocking down our door, ready to negotiate a trade deal. Today, I want to focus on the future of our trade agenda. Looking to the very near future, the administration is required by statute to undertake the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement review process in 2026. I can't understate the importance of the USMCA to my constituents. The growth in the manufacturing sector, spurred on by our cooperation with Canada and Mexico, has helped sustain thousands of jobs in my district. I'm well aware that this agreement is not perfect, and we are fortunate to have the review process in place in order to make the necessary improvements. Ambassador Greer, what commitments can you make to us today in regard to the USMCA review? Specifically, how will you use this opportunity to advance President Trump's goals of promoting domestic manufacturing, and how will you engage with Congress to facilitate this process?
Thank you, Congresswoman. And I'll just note that goods coming from Canada and Mexico right now that comply with the rules of the agreement continue to enter duty-free. This is an important agreement. I met with my Mexican counterpart last night. I have worked in the works. I have a meeting with my Canadian counterparts, and we expect that we will initiate the public consultation process that's required by the statute at some point at the time required. I think with the USMCA, it's important that Canada and Mexico not be used as an export platform for third countries. That's not what we want. USMCA should be an agreement that promotes manufacturing in America and that we can rely on our partners to the north and south if needed. But it can't be a situation where countries can just come in, China or Vietnam or somebody, build a factory in Mexico, assemble it with parts from there and send it across and get the benefit of an agreement where they've taken no obligations. So I want to make sure that it truly is an agreement that helps America first.
Thank you. I've greatly appreciated your leadership in protecting American digital companies abroad. You and I are in agreement about the dangers of South Korea's anti-competitive policies towards American digital companies. I intend to reintroduce legislation that seeks to ensure that American companies are not being harmed by one of our closest allies, while Chinese companies are left unscathed. The digital trade sector is rapidly growing, and it's important that we do not lose market share to China in this critical field. Several countries are considering legislation that mimics the European Union's Digital Markets Act, which has undisputably caused a digital winter for American tech companies operating in Europe. What are your plans to address these harmful policies and to ensure the prosperity of American digital trade? And do you think that digital trade will play a part in the imminent trade discussions regarding the Liberation Day tariffs?
Thank you. So first of all, I understand that there's obviously a national conversation going on about, how digital trade should be regulated, and there are lots of views on that. What I will say is we're not going to outsource that regulation. We're not going to let the European Union or Korea or any other jurisdiction, set the rules for digital trade. It will be us, and they won't be able to do it in a way that's discriminatory either. That is impermissible, especially when we have, as you noted, the Chinese competition out there. If we're going to have companies that operate in this space and are so competitive in this space, we need to make sure that they're American companies, right? That's what we need to make sure. And so this is certainly something that we can talk about in any negotiations that come up.
Thank you. We have historically forged some of our strongest alliances based on procuring critical minerals, which are difficult or nearly impossible to obtain in the U.S. Will you commit to exploring trade discussions and partnerships with like-minded partners to protect and build up our critical minerals today?
Yes.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Neal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would have invoke a moment of upon a personal privilege. When the ambassador called me, it was more to inform me of what the administration was going to do. It wasn't to consult or to seek my opinion as to what they were going to do.
Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to show a slide to everybody documenting where we are with the United States and the U.S. trade deficit. I think this really shows why this is an emergency. If you look at where we are with manufacturing goods, that's in the red column here. If you look at what has happened to the manufacturing capacity of the United States, we have plummeted, absolutely plummeted down. Here in 2022, we have such a trade deficit with manufactured goods. This is critical. This is why the president has said this is an emergency. The same thing with fuels and other total goods. We have plummeted in this nation's capacity to actually produce things. So yes, this is an emergency, and this is by all means altogether the right thing to do. If we do not reverse this trend, again, going with the absolute calamitous effect of how we are hurtling towards a sovereign debt crisis, this nation does not